Hi, this is Marilyn. And can you hear me?
Yes, hi, Marilyn.
Well, the reason you can't see us is we're eating dinner.
Yeah.
And no one else was invited, so we will keep ourselves off video.
Yeah, whatever anybody's
We're from Oregon
comfortable with.
City.
Yeah, we're from Oregon City.
Oh, great. Thanks for joining us. So I can see people are still joining, and so we'll just keep letting people come in until it seems like most are here. We have about 18 people so far, and so we'll wait just a couple more minutes here before we get started. And so if you want to say hi in the chat, you can say hi and maybe tell us where you are, and anything else you might want to share.
Can anybody hear me?
Yes, hi, McLaren.
Hi there. Good for you. I have all sorts of stuff and not a chat box, but I must be chatting with you.
In the real sense. Yeah.
Yes.
Not a text bubble chat, but a legit chat.
Something new. So I'm McLaren Innes and I'm from Astoria and glad to be with you tonight.
Nice. Thanks for joining us. So what you all are joining is Intro to NCLC. We can never figure out the perfect name for this presentation because what we have found is whether you're totally new to North Coast Land Conservancy or maybe are a steeped in NCLC volunteer, it still seems to serve as a great sort of reminder, introduction, sort of immersion into who NCLC is, how we were born, what we do now, what's coming next. So sometimes we call it NCLC 101. It's sort of like this class about NCLC, who we are, how we work, what we're doing, and how you can get involved. Hopefully that's what you're expecting for tonight. Something like that. Yeah. So I'm going to start at 5:35, which is in 1 minute. And then people will still be able to join. And but I'll get started with the official presentation. And what'll be best is if people keep their mute buttons on. Stay muted during the presentation, and then at the end, if you have questions as I go along, just hold your questions, and then at the end we can have question and answer time, and there we can unmute and just kind of figure out how to share the space and not talk over each other. And so we'll stay in mute. That way there's not background noise or feedback or anything that we're dealing with. If you need some like technical help, or if something weird's happening and I don't realize it because I don't see your faces, you could put it in the chat. I'm not going to see the chat, but Lenevia Gomez is here with us to help support tonight's presentation as well, and we'll monitor the chat. And so that'd be a way for somebody to get my attention or get some assistance. And so with that, we're going to get started, okay? I am going to share my screen, and like I say, when I do that, I'm not going to be able to see you anymore. And you'll have some choices about how you can view me. There's ways to, up at the top of your screen, I think there's view options, and you can collapse all the people, you can have it in side-by-side view. There's side-by-side gallery, side-by-side speaker view. So if you had it in side-by-side speaker view, you would see a little box of me and a box of the presentation. And so you have some choices about how you want to lay it out there. And so with that, I am going to welcome you all officially to this introduction to North Coast Land Conservancy. I am Katie Volke. I am the Executive Director with North Coast Land Conservancy, and I'm happy to be your little guide tonight. Thanks for joining this event. We are recording it so that we can share it with people who couldn't join us for this time slot. And if you enjoy it and think that others might like to see it when we share that link, maybe you would want to share it with your friends or neighbors. And so the way I'm going to give this presentation is I'm going to walk you through really what is a land conservancy, down to, you know, who is NCLC, when did we get started, how do we run ourselves, and what are we up to? And so I'll start big picture, and then I'll bring us all the way down to the now and what we're doing now. And so what is a land conservancy? So land conservancies started really in the late 1800s. But you can see that by 1950, there were only 53 land trusts in 26 states. When they first began, it was mostly used as a tool to protect historical sites. So particularly on the East Coast, you see a lot of land conservation that is a historic lands conservation. Battleground sites, you know, early colonial historical homes, and sites like that. The movement then expanded to protect our natural history and natural areas and wildlife habitat, and that really is largely where the movement is now. Most land conservancies are doing nature conservation and working lands conservation. And so today there's more than 1,600 land trusts across the nation. And we have begun to have a truly remarkable impact in terms of the acreage and the places that we have been able to protect through this work. So the land trusts in this country have conserved 56 million acres. That's twice that the land base of national parks. And here in Oregon, there are about 20 land trusts, and we have conserved triple the land base of state parks. North Coast Land Conservancy has been one of those land trusts since 1986. We're one of the oldest land trusts in Oregon. And we choose to operate at the highest standard, and that's how we show our supporters and show the land that we hold it in the highest regard, and that we are going to manage this investment in the best way that is known in our field. And so we sort of prove that by going through this rigorous process of accreditation. So North Coast Land Conservancy, we have a third party every 5 years, looks at us, looks at everything about us, you know, our policies, our standards, our financials, our land management, and analyzes whether or not we are still operating at the highest standard. And because of that, we are one of just about 450 accredited land trusts in the nation. And what a land conservancy is, what we all have in common is that we have a transactional relationship with land. We have taken this sort of Western worldview tool of private land ownership, and we have taken it to use it in a way such that we can bring private land into the public benefit. And so we are private landowners, we have a transactional relationship with land, and we own it, but we own it for the public benefit of clean water, clean air, fish and wildlife habitat, open spaces, etc. So that's what all land conservancies have in common. And then what you see across the nation is the way that we focus, the places that we work. That's what makes every land trust also unique. The North Coast Land Conservancy, our vision is helping to conserve Oregon's coastal lands forever. And we do that really under this larger vision, which is about wanting to participate in ensuring that the Oregon coast is a place where people, plants, fish, and wildlife can all thrive. And so again, we do that, the work under this vision is really a part of, the larger environmental movement. And our niche within that is through this direct relationship with owning and managing land for its natural values. We also do that for others. And so we've expanded state parks, we've expanded national parks. We have worked with municipalities like Cannon Beach, helping to create the Acola Creek Forest Reserve, many times with the city of Seaside, bringing land into public ownership. So that's another way that we use our expertise around land transactions, fundraising, land management to help support others who have these similar goals within our region. And so here's just kind of a picture of, our structure. So we have this goal around natural lands protection. We're an entity that works, together collectively to reach that goal. We do that as a nonprofit. We're governed by a 10-member board of directors, managed by myself, the executive director. We have 9 staff members, and we're supported by many community volunteers. We have 6 committees of community members that are not necessarily staff or board members, also support our programs. And any given year, we might have many hundreds of volunteers who come out for all kinds of reasons. And that's the kind of thing that I'm going to talk about, is ways that you can also volunteer if you're interested in getting more involved with North Coast Land Conservancy. Oh, and then here, of course, we have an annual budget, pretty critical part of ensuring our business. And I'll talk more about how our budget breaks down, but it's around $800,000. And so our impact over these last 35 or so years is, if we measure it in acres, is over 6,000 acres. We have successfully created 66 habitat reserves. They range in size and type from a half an acre to more than 1,000 acres. And with our work of facilitating public ownership, we've had an increased impact over and above. And so to date, we've protected, more than 7,000 acres on the Oregon coast. And we don't have the best way to measure what that real success is. We show it in charts and graphs with acres over time or funds raised over time, and it paints a certain picture of the type of impact and success that we've been able to have. You can see at our humble beginnings in the late 80s and early 90s to where we are today. It has been a wonderful upward trajectory of growth in terms of bringing more and more land into conservation. And the real impact, the real value, and the real measurement is really about this. The reason we do this work is not to measure ourselves in acres and dollars. It is because we deeply value the interconnectivity of all life, and we understand that as people, we receive our life from the earth, and we want to give back to the earth and be a part of that system. It's a privilege to live in this incredible place on the Oregon coast, and we take that privilege with the reciprocal responsibility of caring for it. And so this is the real impact that we have. Forests, open spaces, movement, migration for wildlife, stunning views, feeds the soul, water, creeks, streams, wetlands, drinking water, salmon. That's what our real impact is. And so North Coast Land Conservancy in the late 80s was formed by some local folks in Seaside who were interested in doing environmental work in a different way. At the time that we were formed, the timber wars were very fresh and present. The spotted owl wars, the environmental fights is how a lot of the environmental movement was captured. And our group of people here locally wanted to find a way to make a tangible difference, but by coming together instead of ripping each other apart. And so, so we did our work pretty quietly in the beginning, and found that it was so critical that first we start to build trust in the community, because there was a lot of mistrust, especially around the environmental movement in Clatsop and Tillamook counties. That hasn't totally gone away, but it's vastly different now, the way that we can come together around common goals. And so, like I say, in the beginning, it was pretty quiet. It was a project here, project there, sort of proving out that we were not going to steal anybody's land. We weren't going to make anybody do anything. We were going to find willing participants who were interested in being a part of conservation, and we were going to move forward together, you know, finding that common ground, pointing in the same direction. And so a little bit about those first projects that really have helped to define North Coast Land Conservancy are listed here. Fox Creek. Fox Creek was our first project, and what it was actually a land swap that we facilitated at Saddle Mountain State Park. And there was private timberland next to the state park boundary that was slated for harvest. And that timberland, where it joined the boundary of state parks, on the state park, it was old growth forest. And so ancient giant trees and forest at the border of Saddle Mountain State Park. And as ecologists, what we know is that when you disrupt the border of something like that, it vastly affects the rest of it, the edge effect. And so when, if you remove forest next to that ancient growth, it will deteriorate functionality, the habitat, and the eventual future of that ancient growth. It is protected by its own forest. And so the project that we worked on was actually finding another part in state parks where it was a young stand of forest, more like a tree farm within the state parks. And we facilitated a swap so that the timber company took a different sort of equal acreage, equal timber value parcel that wasn't directly next to a very sensitive forest. It was going to have much less environmental impact if the harvest happened over there instead of here. And the timber company was able to have equal value. And so that was our first project, and it really is a story. It's a lot about our origin story too, the way in which we seek to find common ground. There's probably a lot about that timber company and about NCLC at the time that was not common ground. And yet we all looked to this one point on the land to see if we could come together and do something positive for everybody, and we were successful. And so that has set the tone for our work ever since. The first property that we owned is Wahana Marsh, and Wahana Marsh is about 5 acres on the Neawanna. It's on the east side of Seaside in Neawanna Creek, and it was also a partnership around the softball field was being built. Some of the wetlands was slated as a part of that. We worked with the community to find a way to ensure that the connectivity of the wetlands was not broken. And so Wahana Marsh came into our ownership as a strategy to protect this area. The softball fields were also built. And the board members, I hear the story of Wahana Marsh from the board members who were there at the time. talking about just the pride that they feel still when they drive past that little 5-acre pond. And also that they can't believe, you know, what North Coast Land Conservancy has grown into. And so we started from humble beginnings, and we continue to do our work with humility, and we also have grown vastly since then. Two more kind of keystone defining projects of ours are Neawana Point and Circle Creek. Neawana Point is the historic village site of Neocoxie Village. It's at the borders of Seaside and Gearhart in Clatsop County. It's on the Nicanicum River estuary. And it is where the 3 rivers of the Nicanicum come together. It's the confluence. And so Neocoxie, Nicanicum, and Neawana. And that was a very public and controversial project because there was a resort development that was proposed for that site. It was owned by a Texas-based developer, and the 2 cities didn't agree with what was going to happen. People in town had vastly different views about the benefit or the detriment of this resort going in. And so North Coast Land Conservancy was asked to be involved more from our ecological level of doing an assessment and presenting the ecology of the site to the developer. You know, there's a lot of red tape when you're developing in an estuary, salmon habitat, trees, wetlands. And so even just having a picture of what the land was like was needed for this development. And how it resulted is that in receiving this report, this developer also saw the property for the first time, having never been here before. And in seeing the beautiful photos that were presented by Neil Main as a part of this, that developer, through other influences and through seeing this property, was moved to understand why there was so much controversy and ultimately donated that property to North Coast Land Conservancy. What I'll talk about a little bit more later is that we then ultimately gave it back to the Clatsop people. And then Circle Creek is a property. This is kind of close to the junction of Highway 101 and Highway 26. And Circle Creek's a really critical moment in time for North Coast Land Conservancy, also a very critical part of the Nicanicum watershed. And many people might know where Circle Creek is because it's where the highway floods on Highway 101 used to flood regularly and cut off transportation. We did a project a few years back where we removed a levee. We now flood our own property, and that helps to keep those waters off of the highway and keep the highway open. So Circle Creek's also a point of confluence for the watershed. Amazing old growth Sitka spruce swamp wetlands in there, creek and riverine habitat for salmon and steelhead and other fish and aquatic creatures, and it's the floodplain, and so it absorbs the waters, it filters the waters, it cleans and cares for that freshwater system before it enters the ocean. It was a critical moment in time for North Coast Land Conservancy because it was the first land purchase that we did. Prior to that, all lands had been donated to us. It was our first land purchase. It was quite large at 364 acres and quite expensive for a first land purchase, over $1 million. And so that moment in time is critical to our story because it was our pivot point. It was the moment the organization needed to decide, are we going to do this thing and really commit to this pledge in perpetuity, this forever pledge? Because if not, we ought not do this project. And so that was when the board committed and said, yes, we are going to be an organization. And that has laid a foundation for the rest of how we run ourselves now. We put policies in place and started to do fundraising and think about how to have professional staffing and training, and really took it seriously that if we were going to keep this forever pledge, we needed to build up a strong community-based organization. And so those were our early years. And since then, I came on as a volunteer, actually, is how I started at North Coast Land Conservancy. My background is as a biologist, a field biologist. And I was then hired as a seasonal employee. My first job that first summer season was to create the management plan for Circle Creek. So I came on just about a year after that acquisition, and spent my season walking back and forth on Circle Creek, inventorying the property. And that was an awesome way to start my job there. So that was in about 2005. I then was hired on permanently as the field biologist, and I became one of just 2 permanent employees at the time. So I worked under founding executive director Neil Main, and the 2 of us worked together for about 3 or 4 years before we began to really seriously plan for Neil's retirement. And for many people, Neil Main is, Neil's a conservation hero. Neil's a mentor to so many, was a teacher in the community, grew up here, retired from teaching and created the Land Conservancy, has had a wonderful effect on our community. And it was my great thrill to be able to work under him and learn from him for those first few years. So when he retired, I thought about whether or not I should throw my name into the hat to become executive director. It's definitely not what I ever thought I would do. I was going to be a field biologist. But after having worked for the Land Trust and worked with Neil, I really fell in love with it. I fell in love with the mission, and I felt like I could offer something in this new role. And so I came on as executive director, and during this time is when we created our first strategic plan. Essentially, we were figuring out like sort of life after Neil Main, life after Circle Creek, like our forward trajectory of life in perpetuity. And so since then, we have doubled, tripled, quadrupled our impact, our funding, our staff, and that trajectory continues. And so how we do our work, like I was saying, is through this transactional relationship with land, is how we bring land into conservation. But the reason we do that is because we want to then care for the land. So we sort of transition the land from private land ownership into public benefit. We transactionally transition that land into our ownership. And that is the point at which we change our relationship with that land to become its stewards, and we attempt to then care for the land and have a reciprocal relationship with that land. Give to it because we know that we take from it. And we take food from the land, we take solace and inspiration from the land, water, and life. And so we give back. And that for us is stewardship. And so that's really why we do it, is so that we can be good stewards of the land. So conservation is one of our programs, stewardship is one of our programs. I'm going to talk about each of these programs separately, about how we run ourselves. So outreach, fundraising, finance, organizational development. Those are the programs we organize ourselves around currently. And like I say, we're working under this bigger vision. It's not about each piece of land. It's about the effect of bringing pieces back together. Is really how we would think of it. Connected systems work best. We know that as humans, we know that our very complicated human body system needs to be connected to work. All of the flows and information that go through our lymphatic system, our nervous system, our circulatory system, break one little piece of that connectivity, and the rest of it's going to fall apart darn quick. And that's true of our gray infrastructure. If we just had a bunch of pieces of roads that didn't actually connect, we couldn't deliver the service of transportation, no matter how many cumulative miles of pieces of road you had. If it isn't connected, it doesn't deliver what you need. And that is true on the natural landscape itself. It works best through connectivity. So the principle of connectivity is key to the way that we operate, and using a term like green infrastructure sort of helps us relate to it in the modern world. Gray infrastructure being roads, sewers, piping, that type of infrastructure, and green infrastructure being streams, forests, wetlands. And you don't have to have it all. It doesn't all have to be there, but the connectivity is a pretty key part of it. So this little diagram sort of shows you, if you can have, these hubs, maybe these are big nature preserves or state parks or reserved lands. And it doesn't have to be all the land in between, but paying attention to what you're affecting in between is really critical, because you don't want to break the most important, link in the chain. And so through doing corridor conservation, through having sites along the way to bring together these hubs in a whole network, is how you can really achieve this vision that we're after. And so to help us look at our big service area, which is from the Columbia River down to Siletz Bay, and from the crest of the Coast Range out into the ocean, the territorial sea, to help us look at that big area in a way that we can apply the principle of connectivity, of course, understanding that there's a whole human network that's here and a lot of gray infrastructure that's here. And so applying these principles in that context, we then narrow down our focus into focus initiatives. And so these are regions or systems that we then put our focus on. And then we do individual projects after individual projects in a way that when we put them together, we're achieving connectivity. And so those focus areas, and if you want to learn more about them, there's a lot of information on our website. Right now, they are estuaries. Estuaries are the heart of the coast. In these watershed systems on the coast, everything's coming in and out of the estuary. And just like in our human body, you really need your heart. And so one of our major focus areas is to first protect the heart of that system. The Columbia Quiet Waters is this very rare wetland interdunal swamp network that is up in the region of Warrenton. It's a part of the lower Columbia off-channel wetland system. It's at this point globally rare. Sitka spruce swamps, interdunal lakes and wetlands are a type of habitat that once dominated the entire lower Columbia region, and there's now less than 3% left. In the area of Warrenton and Hammond, there's quite a network still intact, and so we've done a lot of work there to ensure that connection stays. The Neocoxie Wildlife Corridor is the Clatsop Plains, and so we sort of move from the connected system of the quiet waters through a corridor of the Neocoxie, where we're looking at the creek and its associated forests and wetlands and coastal prairie that forms really a migratory corridor for local wildlife. Everything from elk to butterflies need to move up and down in this corridor, along with water and everything that thrives off of that water. And so that's our initiative within the Clatsop Plains area. And then because we originated in Clatsop County in Seaside, much of our work has been focused in that area. You see that in the maps of our impact. We also have worked all the way down to Depot Bay and many places in between since then. But because we were born in that area, you see that we've done quite a lot of work in there. And as I described, our estuaries initiative, our first work was in the Nianticum estuary. We have effectively conserved and protected most, if not all, of the available natural lands in the estuary. Consequently, we get to start moving up the corridor. And so recently we defined the Nianticum Wildlife Corridor as an initiative where we're going to move up that river and start looking at opportunities to bring river, estuary, forest, and wetlands into a connected system there. And then our newest endeavor is the coastal edge. And that is really about a forest to sea land legacy, a connection from the highest peaks all the way down into the ocean. And that region in which we're focusing on the coastal edge is currently from Tillamook Head to Nehalem Bay, and from the peaks of Onion Peak out into the ocean. These in a system like that, the streams are flowing from headwaters at 3,000 feet, plunging down, and in just maybe 1.5 miles to 2 miles are then directly entering the oceans. They're called coastal fronting watersheds or direct ocean tributaries. They're their own unique ecosystem. We have quite a few of these coastal edge type ecosystems up and down the coast. And then in between, we have these larger watersheds like the Nicanacum, the Columbia, the Nehalem. And so that coastal edge fronting range is a focus area for us right now. So now I'll go into some program detail. As I talk about the program detail, I'm also going to highlight volunteer opportunities within that program. Also, as I go into this part of the presentation, I want to offer the disclaimer that these photos were taken in 2019 or earlier. And so you're going to see a lot of unmasked faces and people not socially distanced, and it's because they're old photos. I don't want to worry anybody about how we have been managing a COVID safety protocol. And so because we have had to greatly reduce our interaction and greatly reduce the way in which we work with volunteers during this time of COVID. But we see some light at the end of the tunnel. We also have figured out how to work within COVID safety measures so that we can do some stewardship opportunities. So I want to make sure I still tell you about all the ones that we've been able to do in the past, because I do think we'll be able to do them again. So this program of stewardship, though it has one slide equal to the other programs, this is a huge program. As I said, we buy land so that we can be the stewards, and this is really what our forever commitment is. And so a lot of time and resources need to go into our stewardship program, and a lot of volunteerism helps support that program. This is land management. This is restoration. This is caring for the land. A lot of different ways to talk about what stewardship is. And we kind of try to break down our properties into sort of 3 categories of stewardship, sort of helping us know where we're gonna put our energy and our resources. So one way that we can categorize our lands for stewardship, or that we are protecting it simply by acquisition. It's already an awesome forest or an awesome swamp or an incredible wetland. It's in great shape. It really just needs us to check on it every once in a while. And so that goes into our, just protection is the strategy. And we achieve protection through that relationship of owning it. Many of our lands fall into other categories where they need a little bit more care from us. So passive habitat enhancement is where we are doing what we call, removing a perturbation or removing a disturbance, invasive species, blocked culverts, fish barriers. We're removing something, and by removing that invader or that unnatural part, we're helping to set the land back on a trajectory of its processes coming back into harmony. And so much of our stewardship work is in this category of passive habitat enhancement. And much of our time is spent removing invasive species. A number of you here I know have come out and helped us to do that. And that's a pretty big commitment that we're gonna have for a long time, but we really can see the results of it, how it changes the ability for the land to heal itself. And then the 3rd category is called active habitat enhancement. And this commonly is also called restoration. And we use that word too, but we like to capture this concept of active habitat management, because restoration really implies going backwards. And what we're doing is going forward. So, humans have had a great impact on the planet, for better or worse. Humans always have had a relationship with the natural world. In more recent times with colonialism and settlement out here, we have sometimes done a lot of harm also. And so active habitat enhancement is about just taking all those factors into account, looking at the land for what it is right now, bringing all that knowledge that we have from all of these different ways of knowing, and then applying that as best we can to support this land so that it can also get back on a trajectory of self-healing. But in this category, it's very active. And so like at Circle Creek, for example, we've done a lot of active habitat enhancement there. We have removed a levee, moved earth 2 miles, 4 feet high of a levee, removed that with heavy equipment. We have planted tens of thousands of native plants and trees. We mow, we remove invasive species. We have created or recreated wetlands also with like bringing in heavy machinery to remove fill that had been put into a channel, to remove dump sites that had been dumped into river canyons so that that river can flow again. So we call that active habitat enhancement, going forward, trying to help that land be as productive as it can be. And an active habitat enhancement or restoration is very fun, exciting work. It's also very expensive. And you have sort of the least knowledge about how successful you will be, because as we know, if something isn't broken, it's going to function at its best. If something has been broken and then you fix it, you try to fix it so that it can function at its best. But you might not ever be able to get there. And it's incredibly worth trying. And certainly our efforts make these places be more functional, provide better habitat. But it takes a lot of money and resources to do that. And so we do look very carefully at taking into account all of these things. Where is this property? What habitat does it have on it? Where is it in a network of potential connectivity? How much help does it need to thrive? How critical of a place is it? So somewhere like Circle Creek is critical to the functioning of the Nikanacum watershed. It is such a huge piece of the floodplain. It is where that whole watershed plunging down off Saddle Mountain is then going to meet with the estuary and the ocean. So that place thriving, very important. And that's why we decided, yes, we will invest and invest again in this place. But we carefully look at all of that, again, because we want to keep our pledge in perpetuity and make sure we don't become stretched too thin. And so we do that with a ton of volunteerism. And here's a few ways in which people can volunteer. We have site stewards, and that program is people who are very dedicated to doing independent work and are willing to say, I'm going to take this responsibility on for years, not just a day or a few months, because it takes a fair amount of training and orientation to bring in our site steward volunteers. But our site stewards then become our eyes and ears out there. They monitor our properties for us, visit them multiple times throughout the year, visit their borders, look at the habitat, monitor what's going on, and report back to us. And so that way we can do more and more land acquisition, because we have this base of people that are helping to make sure we ensure that those that we've already acquired are still being monitored and cared for. We have work parties. Those are always very fun, where we can invite the public. These are the kinds of volunteer days that you can come out for once or many times and be helpful regardless. So we plant trees, we weed, we mulch the trails, we maintain the buildings, anything that will work better in a group is when we can bring the community out to be a part of this relationship of caring for the land. And then something that our stewardship staffers have really championed, Melissa and Eric, have brought together Weed Warrior Wednesdays in the last few years. And this is a dedicated group of folks that many of them often come out every Wednesday. And they get an email that week that says, this is where we're going and this is what we're going to do. And it largely is about staying on top of invasive species. We can be much more successful in eradicating weeds from certain habitat areas if we really stay on top of it, so that the seeds and the roots and rhizomes don't spread. And so the Weed Warrior Wednesday has been a wonderful volunteer program that has really helped to enhance and help our lands to thrive. And so I'm going to move on to this next program. Our outreach program is something that is, you know, this program I'm putting on for you right now, we would say that's part of our outreach program. It's increasing awareness about our work and also the effect of land conservation generally, the benefits of land conservation at a global and a local and even at a personal level. We do this by trying to engage people in our work as much as we can in a variety of ways. Take them on hikes, provide lectures, presentations, interactions with wildlife, a variety of ways in which we try to help engage people with the land. You know, people used to be directly participating with land, and in just a few generations, we've become quite removed from our relationship with place. And so our outreach program aims to rebuild some of those relationships between people and land so that we can ensure that future generations have a land ethic where they know how to care for their place and they want to because they know about their place and it feels like theirs. Volunteers are super critical to our outreach program. It's also a very fun program to interact with. You get to go on hikes and walks to all these different places that otherwise are pretty hard to find, might not have trails. You really kind of need the guided walk experience. And so we do that through our On the Land program. If we do lectures around the community, we have volunteers come and help us support those lectures. Maybe they're bringing snacks or brewing coffee, helping with the sign-in sheet, helping plug up the media, you know, to make sure that AV works, that type of thing. We show up at farmers markets. We have an annual picnic. All of that is a great way to be able to engage through volunteerism. And then an event that we've done annually for the last few years that'll come up again this summer called Coast Walk is something that you can participate in by registering and then doing this amazing walk along the Oregon coast that we help facilitate. And also we have volunteers that really help us pull off that Coast Walk experience. And Coast Walk then also in return becomes a fundraiser for us. We can raise about $40,000 by putting on that event. And the registration for Coast Walk 2021 information will get posted March 1st. And so if you're interested in that, you can keep your eye out for that. This is our very important program too, fundraising program. A lot of people don't like talking about fundraising. A lot of people don't like to raise funds. You know, certainly in our culture, talking about money is mostly not people's favorite thing to do, but also we all know that it's incredibly critical, something we all deal with every day. And everybody knows that North Coast Land Conservancy needs money to run. So our program is really around, not to sound too cheesy, but is around making fundraising fun. I mean, I'm a biologist, you know, being a fundraiser is just about the last thing I thought I would ever do. I was pretty nervous about becoming the executive director because of fundraising. One of the main things I was most nervous about, because I thought it had a lot to do with being, you know, like a salesperson or begging people for something. And what has been a really joyful experience is participating in fundraising at NCLC. This is how we do it. You know, look at those smiling faces and that beautiful spread of food. We have volunteers that help us host parties, have house parties, picnics, events, where we bring people together so that we can tell them about the exciting work that we're doing and ask them if they want to be a part of it. We don't beg anybody. We don't make anybody do anything. But we do believe that a lot of people value conservation and want to be a part of it. And for a lot of people, giving some of their funds is a really meaningful way that they can participate in a movement. You know, for me, I can participate by working at NCLC. And for some of our donors, they actually will thank us, you know, for doing this work when we're thanking them for their contributions. So it turns out fundraising really is a lot less about money and a lot more about people and passion for a cause. And it's one of the many ways in which we can all come together around a cause. And so we also have a lot of volunteerism around fundraising committees, fundraising volunteers. And it's a lot about what we do for fundraising is get to know other people who share our same passion, and together we work on the mission. And so it does, of course, take money to run North Coast Land Conservancy. And so this is, I want to just show you sort of a little bit of a breakdown, little insider view to our finances. This is a sort of summarized look at our budget. And these categories, I'll just describe briefly. We have that top one there, unrestricted contributions. So that is the result of fundraising, and that is the result of people like you responding to our fundraising letters, popping a check in the mail, signing up for Coast Walk. It is donations from people, and they're unrestricted. It's to support our cause and for us to spend as we need to. Unrestricted contributions are very important. They really make it possible for NCLC to take advantage of opportunities. Because they're unrestricted, it helps us be flexible and move in the right direction. If we need to change priorities, we have that flexibility. Restricted contributions are just that. It's for a particular purpose. And so we also receive restricted contributions from people. Often for a project, like maybe for the Circle Creek Trail or for a particular land acquisition, and people choose for it to go directly there rather than to our general operations. And that's kind of the main part and where our individual fundraising comes from people, you know, sharing of their gifts. We also then use the expertise that we have on staff to apply for grants, and grants are a huge part of our budget. And so stewardship grants, operational grants, investment income, and conservation transactional grants might amount to a couple of millions of dollars over and above that annual contribution. So that's when we're applying to maybe like the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board or the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for grants to come in to help us plant trees, to help us do river restoration, to help us buy the Rainforest Reserve. We definitely cannot ignore this part here, the in-kind contributions, an incredible part of our budget. And again, that's where the volunteerism is. I haven't mentioned it yet, but I will here. Outside of those programs, we have an office that we run. We have newsletters that need to get into an envelope. It takes a lot of human power and a lot of time to get out our communications, to track our donations, track our thank yous, make sure that we're being in communication. And we have volunteers that help manage our database, help get our mail from the post office, help organize our work in spreadsheets, and a massive amount of help with many people who stuff the envelopes for all those wonderful newsletters and reports that you receive. And so that is a major part of our workforce. and it accounts for at least 4 full-time jobs. So volunteerism, again, is a really critical part of NCLC. So I'm just going to kind of keep going into the organizational stuff here. We have committees. So I've talked about these different programs, what those programs do, and how volunteers can come into those programs. This is kind of their role at the organizational structure level. And so we have staff is out doing work, we're implementing the strategic plan, we're implementing goals. We have a pretty rigorous review process. When we have a new idea or a new project, we bring it through committee evaluates it and either recommends that we move forward or recommends that we don't. Those are called our governance committees. And so our executive committee, our finance committee, and our organizational development committee are governance committees, and they're a part of our leadership structure. We have at least one board member, at least one staff member, and at least a few community members on each of those committees. And so, so our leadership at NCLC is a mix of community members, board members, and staff. And then we have outreach, fundraising committees as well. And those we call management committees. All those activities I was just describing of hosting house parties, stuffing newsletters, all of that type of work that we're doing with volunteers often is coming through our committees, our outreach and fundraising committees. The folks that choose to be on committees commit to multiple hours a month in their volunteerism. So they're very committed volunteers showing up each time. That consistency becomes really important to our process. And so, so there's a variety of ways in which you kind of can plug into volunteerism here. So those management committees are ones that really support the staff in our work. You know, the board has already said what our priorities are and how we want to communicate and what our timelines and our budget are. And then we just got to get the work done. And so our management committees, our outreach and fundraising committees, they support the staff. Staff directs them and they help get our work done. And so all of that's captured in this org chart. I only share this not because I think you might find it totally interesting, but just I like to just highlight that about North Coast Land Conservancy, that we have a lot of structure that we work within. It's what helps us be very successful. We have good communication, lines of authority. We understand the difference between management and governance. I know what my job is, separate from the board knowing what their job is, and we know how to work together. And it takes a lot of nurturing and a lot of focus to make sure that a group body like that can function so well. You know, much like in a family, you have to nurture your relationships, know people's strengths, people's desires, you know, have that type of way in which you interact with each other. And that is how North Coast Land Conservancy really tries to operate within its structure. And we do all of that so that we can, again, have this kind of impact. And so I'm sharing just a little bit about what kind of successes we had and effect we had in like 2019 and 2020, removing hundreds of acres of invasive species, planting tens of thousands of native plants. And, you know, this is just in 2 years, not in our whole history of time. You can see the variety of ways in which these volunteers are interacting. You might be full on in the mud. You might be out in this wide open prairie that's right next to a development. You might be in deep forest to do any one of these activities. And we love to put on these events. We have put on, you know, some years as many as 50. This last year with COVID, the number of events were virtual events, and we still were able to do more than 30. And so connecting with people, connecting the people with our mission, connecting the people with the land is very important to us, even more so than it ever has been. And it's very fun. Picnics and auctions and hikes. And so here are just a few new habitat reserves. Here are some projects that we have completed just in this last year, even during the pandemic. Down in the Tillamook River estuary, we recently conserved this beautiful piece of land. This is tidally influenced on a high tide. That whole lower meadow there might be covered in water. Incredible salmon and waterfowl habitat, and then fringed with forest and forested wetland, then directly connected to the Tillamook River and then to Tillamook Bay. This is one that we just completed this summer. And we'll be working in partnership with Tillamook Rivers Estuaries Partnership, another nonprofit in Tillamook Bay, and they'll be taking on a good amount of the management of the restoration down there. So that's this project is great in and of itself, and it's also a really nice partnership relationship that we're going to have with another nonprofit whose expertise is around restoration and active habitat development. So in that way, we're able to kind of do more and expand our capacity through that collaboration. Quite noteworthy in this last year, even again during the pandemic, we crested the $9.5 million mark for our Rainforest Reserve campaign. This is something we've been working on now for about 5 years. It's a $10 million campaign to conserve 3,500 acres of forest and rivers and watershed in the area of the high mountains of Onion Peak, Brandon of Oswald West State Park, and the Cape Falcon Marine Reserve. This massive campaign, like we say, $10 million campaign, seems a little bit audacious. It's an amazing place in the world, and it's amazing that we have had around 600 individuals contribute to this project, along with state and federal and local foundations and grants to get us to this point. And so in 2021, we will be reaching for this $10 million finish line, climbing to the top of that beautiful waterfall drawn by Sally LeCaff. And reaching the top of that waterfall, we have about $440,000 to go. Totally encourage you to learn more about the Rainforest Reserve. We have a lot of beautiful photos and information and illustrations on our website. And this is what the Rainforest Reserve is. So I will leave it at that with this compelling picture of everything below the clouds, and all these mountains above the clouds are part of that 3,500 acres. Another project that we completed in this last year of 2020, it's one of the most meaningful professional and personal experiences that I have had, which is that we transferred what we had called Neawana Point. We transferred it and returned it to the Clatsop people, gave the land back to the people whose land it rightfully is. And there's a story about this land transfer tonight, actually, on OPV. I was reminded that at 8:30 on the field guide, there'll be a bit of a story about this. And this is, like I say, one of the more meaningful experiences that I've had in land conservation. The more I'm involved in land conservation and the more I understand about the North Coast and its history, the more I understand the deep loss that our whole community has experienced in the form of the removal of Indigenous people from the land, and the deep loss that the land itself has experienced from that. And so this is a small step in a direction of repairing relationship with land and elevating a culture who at their most core values understands and values that interconnectivity of all life as part of our life source. And that's really how we're going to ultimately achieve our vision, is if human relationship with land can become that foundational again. And so I say all that as I move on to this what's next slide. And there in the middle there is a learning journey. And that's a big part of what is next for North Coast Land Conservancy, is elevating Indigenous voices, understanding the history and the relationship that Indigenous people know about this land, about this place, repairing, helping to repair a human relationship with land so that the Oregon coast really can thrive. And also a part of our learning journey for what's up next for North Coast Land Conservancy, really goes towards seeking full representation. As I described the path for North Coast Land Conservancy, it's a similar path for many successful organizations and businesses. We found wonderful people to come in and support a wonderful cause. But when we really look at our volunteers, our staff, our board, our leaders, the people who influence our decision making and therefore influence the landscape itself, we understand more now than ever that we just don't have full representation. We are a largely white, older middle class to upper class group, and we need diversity to help ensure that this vision really can last in perpetuity. And so we're on a path of understanding that more greatly now, and we are seeking ways to have more full representation so that we can bring in the richness of perspective to help positively influence our decisions and again, the effect on the landscape. And so a big part of that is, again, connecting with the Indigenous community, connecting with Latinx members of our community, and connecting with the young citizens of our community. And so we also have an exciting newly emerging relationship with the Seaside School District, where Circle Creek will become a place that might be able to even serve a bit as a bit of an outdoor classroom for the school district, an easy close by place to be able to do field trips and for children to grow up on, to visit more than once, to really be able to engage with place and have that connection with their community and with their home in a deeper and richer way. So those are some things that I'm just very excited about for North Coast Land Conservancy as we're looking to this next phase. Here we are in the time of COVID. What's next for us there? We're still operating under safety protocols for nearly a year now. We've been working from home. I'm joining you from the downstairs bedroom, my home in Nahalo, where I have been since March of last year. Our staff has learned how to use technology, much like many of you, and stay connected. We really miss each other, and we're still able to move the cause forward. But it certainly doesn't feel as rich when we aren't doing it directly together. And so that continues, and we're trying to look ahead and offer events, offer Coast Walk in this time of uncertainty, offer volunteerism in this time of uncertainty with COVID, where we still don't exactly know, like, what's the new normal going to look like? When's that going to happen? So you'll notice that we'll start to have some offerings, and they'll be adjusted, for group size, for spacing, for being outdoors. And so our volunteerism doesn't look the same as it has in years past, and we're not able to be quite as responsive as we have been able to be. But come spring, we're looking to ensure that we can open our lands again, the trails at Circle Creek, and to open some level of volunteerism on the land too. So, so please stay in touch about that. And in the meantime, we'll certainly continue with having some of these virtual events. And of course, what is to come is this photograph at the top, Onion Peak, the eastern boundary, the icon mountain of the Rainforest Reserve Project. And that is a project that we will complete in terms of its acquisition in 2021. And in so doing, we will have participated in an unprecedented creation of a conservation corridor that spans from the high mountain summits all the way out into the ocean as the Rainforest Reserve joins to Oswald West State Park and the Cape Falcon Marine Reserve. And so we're exploring some really exciting relationships with the Friends of Cape Falcon Marine Reserve so that we can bring that value and principle of connectivity even into our organization and see how we can live fully into our understanding of natural systems by looking at land and sea together and not separately. That's something to come with the creation of the Rainforest Reserve. We take on quite a stewardship burden. It's a burden we welcome, but it's a huge new place that we're going to get to know, that we will need to manage the forest, understand where the forest needs us to leave it alone and where the forest needs our help. And it'll also be a place where we will be looking at, human interaction with the land, recreation, trails, hunting. That planning is still to come in this year. And then starting in this year and in the years to come, as we move into a new phase of our strategic planning, what we know is that we're going to really directly look at how can we address climate change locally through land conservation. It's something we have always had a positive effect on. Conservation of forests, conservation of wetlands, connectivity of habitat, all of that is very important in this time of a changing climate. But more and more, there's some very specific available science and information for Oregon of where you can do land conservation to have the biggest impact on carbon drawdown. And on the Oregon coast in our service area, that largely points us to the forests and forest conservation and ensuring that we make sure that the places in which the forests and trees have the greatest potential to suck carbon dioxide out of the air and store it, that we do that. So maintaining old forest and maintaining growing forest is one of the greatest ways that Oregon can participate in the global needs of conservation. That's how amazing and critical the rainforests of Oregon are, is that even on a global level, you can look to the temperate rainforest of Oregon as being a part of the solution. And so we will be putting a lot of attention on that to make sure that we invest in those most critical places. We also will be really looking at drinking water protection. More and more, we're becoming aware of and affected by the differences between managing land for forest and timber and managing land for drinking water. And we have a unique system of small streams feeding each community out here. And we don't have reservoirs, dams, and lakes that our water is coming from. And so we need streams to flow full and clear and clean year round. And of course, we have more and more people that are drawing from those drinking water sources, and they're doing that in the summer when there's the least amount of water. So again, looking at critical drinking water sources, how they interact with the forest and wetlands, streams, and wildlife habitat around them, and prioritizing those areas where all those things come together, I know will also be a big part of what's coming up in the future for us. And so with that, I'm going to say, if any of that compels you, please stay in touch with us. Submit a volunteer inquiry. There's a way that you can do that online very easily. Visit our website. If you're wondering about things that I've said, or curious about maps of properties or different things like that, a lot of stuff is on our website. You also can email me anytime to ask questions. You can follow us on social media and find out an awful lot about what we're up to, projects that we've been working on, events that are coming up, cool things happening on the land with the critters and the wildlife and the plants. Is often on social media. And then, of course, please ask me more about the Rainforest Reserve. If you're compelled to be a part of that legacy project and help us get to the finish line, I'd love to talk with you about how your support can make a difference. And so I'm going to say thank you so much for joining me tonight, for being interested in NCLC, and thank you to all the volunteers that are in the Zoom room right now for showing up once again and helping NCLC be such a success in our conservation work. And with that, we will leave you with a big thank you, a reminder about what the website is. And then I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can open it up for any questions or comments if there's any. And so if you want to, if anybody has anything to say, ask me about the presentation or otherwise, go right ahead. You could try to put it in the chat or just go ahead and unmute yourself and speak up.
Katie?
Yes.
It's Marty McCullough. I'm wondering how you initiate partnerships in terms of preserving land with potential development interests. How do you do that? We have something that's happening near our area that we have an interest in because we border an Eocoxy forest, and there's a development proposed north of us, which would block access to that area that you own.
Mm-hmm.
And we would like to be involved somehow in that. I'm president of the HOA for the reserve, so we're interested in both the Eocoxy forest and the Little Butterfly Reserve to the south of us. Both from a stewardship position.
We work with willing landowners. That's always been a really important tenet of how we do our work. And we have often worked with developers, especially in the Eocoxy corridor. That is a way that we've been able to preserve land, and it is who many of the landowners are. And so, you know, for us, if land is like under imminent threat, if a real estate sign is put up already, if a development plan is fully in the works, we might not be successful in building a relationship with that landowner because of the timing of it. So our willing landowner relationships are critical, because all of these land transactions that we have done, if we do them fast, we do them in maybe 2 years, and in other times, it's maybe been a 10-year story or more for some of our land transactions. It just depends on how we're bringing it all together, how the fundraising's coming in, who are the other people involved, what is their timeline. And so having a willing landowner is pretty critical in terms of sticking it out during that timeline. The way we've been successful in working with developers is in a few ways. So sometimes there's just a lot of red tape in putting in a development, and we can be a solution. We can help sort of remove that red tape by taking on, you know, the quote burden of the wetlands or the endangered species habitat or the setback, because that's what we want. You know, we want to take care of those areas. And so there's been times where we've worked with developers to place open space in such a way that it preserves the connectivity, and then we become the long-term owners or stewards of that land. There have been times, so sometimes in development design, we've been able to make an effect. Sometimes it's just going to be really expensive to put in that development. And so having a way to develop less and maybe donate the land and not have the burden of caring for that land, sometimes that's something that can work out for developers. And so in these examples, in the kind of example that you're bringing up, I think our outreach is an important part of it, just the community at large knowing about North Coast Land Conservancy and being able to point to us as a resource for these kinds of things. And if a landowner has even just the littlest inkling of thinking that we might be able to be a resource, we usually can open a pretty productive dialogue. And so, I'm not sure if that's directly helpful, but that is largely how we have worked in those situations.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. How about others? Hey, Lynette, are you there? And do you know if you're seeing anything in the chat? I haven't tracked it well.
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I have not seen any questions in the chat.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, here we go. It looks like, oh, it's Walt Minkeski. Hi, Walt. I haven't seen you in a while. You're asking about funding needs to complete the Rainforest Reserve. Oh, so we are going to complete the Rainforest Reserve in 2021, so less than a year to complete the funding for that project, and we need to raise just $440,000 more to reach that $10 million goal. And thank you, Walt, for the support you've given so far.
Robert asked if we have a prospective, project pipeline. So I guess a list of, list of projects maybe.
Great question. Yeah, we receive a lot of phone calls, and so we are always evaluating new potential projects. As I described, we have a long process. It's a necessarily long process, again, because we're in this forever business. And so we have to make sure that what we take on, that we have the capacity and the ability to think about that long-term responsibility. And we also have to get to know the land and to evaluate that long-term responsibility. And so we receive a lot of phone calls, and we send a lot of projects through that process. So an example of that process, somebody calls and says, hey, I have this land in the Neocoxy corridor. I own it with my sister. It's our inheritance. We kind of need some money out of it. We don't necessarily want to develop it. That's one of the options. What about you guys? Is there a way to work with you? So we might receive a phone call like that. And what we're going to do is look at that property on the map, first get a little bit of an idea of how it fits into the context of our other work, other lands around it. Then we're going to go visit that property and get that firsthand knowledge of what is it. Again, we don't want to evaluate things off of strict parameters like acreage, for instance, or location, because sometimes going there is the most critical part in our understanding of just how important this place might be or not, and just how hard it might be to manage it or not. So we go there, we get to know it, we write up reports, we send them through our committees, we have a group process about looking at our different priorities. Does this match? Is this a good idea? Is it just something that one person was excited about, or can we all put a lot of energy behind it? And then it goes to our board and we do that same thing. So that's just the front loading of staff getting permission to work on a project. And then working on the project, that can take so many different forms. And so the answer is yes, we do have a list of prospective projects because we are often somewhere along the line of that process with other projects. The Rainforest Reserve, for example, is something that we have envisioned for more than a decade and actively worked on for more than a decade. And then we got to a point where we had a landowner agreement and we launched a fundraising campaign. That happened 4.5 years ago. And so sometimes it's a big project like that, a big effort to raise money. We have to evaluate funding sources. Maybe it's an amazing piece of land, but it's for sale and it's expensive and it doesn't match any of our known fundraising sources. Those are heartbreaking ones, you know, because we want to work on that badly. And but there's just not always a way to kind of put together the whole puzzle. And sometimes the puzzle comes together in an amazing way and we can move swiftly along. And so that's maybe sort of a glimpse about what that prospective project list might look like. And I'm sure you noticed that I'm not saying anything directly because we also keep our projects pretty confidential when we're working on them. Sometimes we can talk about them a little bit more freely, but as you know, land ownership's it's a deeply held value in American culture, and and it can be complicated. It can be controversial. Amongst family, amongst neighbors, in a community. There's a lot of opinion. Once you start to say you're going to do something with your own land, there's a lot of opinion that might come into it. And so in order to, protect privacy of landowners, we often keep our projects quite confidential until we enter that public phase of knowing that we're going to do it and needing to actively raise funds. Thank you for that question. Anything else, folks, before we sign off? Again, for sure, if something else comes up with you, don't hesitate to shoot me off an email or to our general account, nclc@nclctrust.org. We try to be really responsive to that kind of thing. And I hope this was valuable for everybody. Thank you so much for coming to learn more and to maybe learn again. And hopefully I'm gonna see you in some volunteer capacity in the not too distant future. So thank you, everybody. Have a great night. Stay safe. Stay healthy.
Thank you.
Great to see you all.